So as I said, today's gospel reading is about Jesus' transfiguration. We read a version of this every year on Transfiguration Sunday, and they're all a little bit different in every gospel. So I invite you to listen to Luke's story of the Transfiguration. About 8 days after Jesus said these things, he took Peter, John, and James and went up on a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes flashed white like lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, were talking with him. They were clothed with heavenly splendor and spoke about Jesus' departure, which he would achieve in Jerusalem. Peter and those with him were almost overcome by sleep, but they managed to stay awake and saw his glory as well as the 2 men with him. As the 2 men were about to leave Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it's good that we're here. We should construct 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But he didn't know what he was saying. Peter was still speaking when a cloud overshadowed them. As they entered the cloud, they were overcome with awe. And then a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen." Even as the voice spoke, Jesus was found alone. They were speechless and at the time told no one what they had seen. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So like I said, a version of this story happens in every gospel. Matthew tells it, Mark tells it, Luke tells us. It happens, however, in slightly different points in Jesus' ministry. For Luke, Jerusalem is everything. Jerusalem is the end goal. Jerusalem is the whole point of the gospel. It's what they're trying to get to. And so this story comes immediately after Jesus' first passion prediction. It's the first time he tells the disciples that he's going to have to go to Jerusalem to be crucified. It's the turning point. It's when things start getting real. This is the moment where the disciples begin to realize what it is that Jesus is actually going to do. I mean, the stories that had come before, they'd seen miracles, they'd seen healings, they had seen resurrections, they had seen all kinds of things. But Jesus was always looking like Jesus. But this time, and in this place, and for this moment, the disciples got a glimpse of who the real Jesus was. Of who the real Jesus was behind the mask. Who the real Jesus was when Jesus wasn't in his human form. They saw for a moment a glimpse of heaven. And what struck me this time when I read the story is that nowhere in this story are they afraid. I feel like every gospel story, right? Every time the people encounter Jesus or an angel or some form of the heavens in an unmitigated, unfiltered way, there's always a voice saying, "Do not be afraid, it's going to be okay." Right? The angel appears to Mary, and the first thing the angel says is, "It's going to be okay. Do not fear." The angel appears to Joseph and says the same things. The angel appears to the shepherds and says the same thing. Every time heaven opens up and humans get a little glimpse of what heaven looks like, they are told not to be afraid. Because the truth is, every time we see a little glimpse of heaven, every time we're reminded of our mortality, every time we go to the doctor and they say, "Hey, stop eating so much. Take care of yourself. Heaven is closer than you think," we get afraid. But the disciples here are not afraid. There is nothing in this encounter that frightens them. They should be afraid. They should be terrified. Their best friend just turned into something that looked like a heavenly being. They should be terrified. But nowhere in this story is anybody afraid. They are in awe. They are in wonder. They are overcome, but not afraid. And it strikes me how much of our life we end up living in fear. How much of our life is defined by how afraid we are? How much of our life is defined by a scarcity mindset? The idea that at any moment and any time, we might lose everything and be kicked out of our house and be wandering alone on the streets with no clothes on, right? Like, how much of our life is defined by our fear that something out of our control is about to happen? How much of our life is defined by our fear of what is just beyond our reach? We're afraid of the future. We're afraid a little bit of the present. We're afraid of all of the things that happen in the world that are too big for us to get our hands on. We spend a lot of time online hate watching and doom scrolling because we seem to be addicted to this feeling of fear. It happens all the time. And it's okay to be afraid. Sometimes we should be afraid. Fear is a healthy reaction to certain situations. Most women are afraid when they're walking by themselves down a staircase, right? If you're in a parking garage and you're by yourself, every woman I know is just a little bit afraid because you're a little bit vulnerable, right? That's a healthy reaction to a situation in which you find yourself. But a lot of times our fear is way out of proportion to the things that we have in our lives. It's called catastrophizing. It happens so often and so common that they've invented a word to help us think about it, and it's called catastrophizing. It means that when you think of something that is a little bit scary, you immediately jump to the absolute worst possible thing that could happen, right? When the wind blows a little bit hard and you're convinced your house is about to fall down, right? We live in a culture of catastrophizing, as if at any moment the whole world's going to collapse. We're a little bit addicted to this because it feels kind of good to be afraid and angry and all filled up with all those emotional things that we deal with, only to find out that in reality, it's probably not going to happen. Whatever you just invented in your head is the most likely outcome that we should definitely be afraid of is probably not what's going to happen. 5 people a year die in vending machine accidents. It's probably not going to happen to you. And yet we still use vending machines. There's a chance you get struck by lightning just walking around outside at any moment. You could get struck by lightning, but we don't walk around afraid all the time that we're about to be struck by lightning. I remember one time when I was a kid, we were watching TV, and my parents had one of those old console TVs, you know, if you're old like me, the big ones with the wood around it and the little screen in the middle. It wasn't that little, but it was little. They'd had it for like a long time, and my dad was watching something on the TV. My sister and I were playing restaurant in the kitchen, and she was ordering things, and out of nowhere, I mean, it wasn't even cloudy, out of nowhere, lightning struck the tree in our backyard. I don't know what Dad was watching on TV, but it was something. God was not happy. But out of nowhere, lightning struck struck the tree. It fell in my parents' bedroom and fried this TV that they'd been carrying around for 20 years, right? So things happen. But the chances of that happening again in my lifetime are so infinitesimally small that I do not, in fact, make my kids turn the TV off when the lightning comes. I let them take baths when it's raining outside. I know, right? We like to catastrophize. We like to make things seem worse than they are. We like to be afraid of things. And yet the gospel reminds us that there is very often nothing to be afraid of. So what if our response instead was a little bit of awe? What about when these things happen that are out of our control? What about when these things happen that we feel like we're not going to be able to deal with? What if instead we looked at them not with fear, but with the hope that something amazing is about to happen? What if we looked at them instead as an opportunity to see the miraculousness of God, who can change from human to God and back again? After my mother's stroke, they told us that there was a 3% chance that she would survive it, right? We were in the ER room and they looked at us and said, she's had a massive stroke, 3% chance that no matter what we do, she would survive. So we revived, we had gotten to a place where we were like, Okay. Like, not a lot of options here for us, right? And for that time, when we thought not a lot of options for us, right, nobody was afraid. Everybody was at peace. All of us were just dealing with the inevitability of what was to come. It wasn't until about a half an hour later when the surgeon came and said, well, my boss wanted me to tell you that it's probably not as dire as you think. It's probably not as dire as we think. We could do this procedure and 25% chance it's going to work. So I just want you to know that there's an option. And that is when fear creeped into us, right? That's when we became afraid, because what if we made the wrong decision? What if we made the wrong decision? And the doctor said, you can try it. You won't know for a week if it'll work, but we can try it. And that's when fear started driving the bus. That's when fear creeped in, when there was a chance, when there was hope, when there was a possibility, when we had to step up and make a decision that was way outside of our ability to do, right? I cannot see God and what's in God's head. I don't know what the future holds for that. I don't know what the right decision is. But at that point, when the doctor said there's hope, I was like, well, we should try it, right? Because what if we don't try it? And then mom's mad at us and haunts us for the rest of her heavenly life, right? My fear that I would make the wrong choice started driving the bus. And I was absolutely going to make the wrong choice. If it had been up to me, I absolutely would have made the wrong choice. I absolutely would have done the wrong thing because I was afraid for me. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to handle what was to come, right? And it would have been the wrong choice. Would have absolutely been the wrong choice. And that is the truth. That anytime we let fear drive the bus, anytime we let fear make the decisions for us, anytime we act out of our insecurity and our inability to get our hands around stuff, we will make the wrong decision. We will. Because that's us driving the bus. That's our fear driving the bus. It's not God. Because when God opens up a glimpse of heaven, when God reveals himself to us, when God gives us these little glimpses of happenstances and God moments and God sightings, and when God does cool things, those are the moments where fear vanishes. When we open up our eyes to see God in the form that God truly is, we do not need to be afraid anymore. And we can instead respond with hope and with awe and with the true statement that God is really cool and we don't need to be afraid. Amen.